Let's jump into Phoenix. So they obviously had a lot of pressure on them coming into the offseason. They made the Kevin Durant deal at the trade deadline. They got the new owner with deep pockets, wants to mix things up. And so it'd be interesting to see, okay, do they keep the core together or do they break something up? And they jumped right in and broke it up or really blew it up with the Bradley Beal deal. So they sent out Chris Paul and Landry Shamet, and basically every second round pick and pick swap available to them. They literally depleted every piece of draft capital they had to add Bradley Beal. And I think there's definitely some things to like about the pairing of Beal and Devin Booker, kind of at the two guard spots or on the wing. They both can shoot well enough and handle well enough that they kind of are force multipliers for each other on offense. It is going to be, I think, a defensive issue. And so, if you take a snapshot of that point in the offseason, I think it was probably a questionable move because they had basically no way to make the roster better, no way to add those wing defenders. And so they're really going to be dependent on their signings on the minimums in free agency. But then they went out in free agency, and I think they largely nailed those signings. Now, I think lots of people are kind of getting too excited about those minimum signings. I mean, there's a reason these guys were available at the minimum. I think Eric Gordon's the only guy that probably was really surprising that it was possible he was at the minimum. But I think they got the kinds of players you want and you need if you're building a roster around their core four. So if you look at, okay, I got Bradley Beal, I got Devin Booker, that means I need someone who can capably defend point guards. And okay, I've got Kevin Durant, I need a guy who can, maybe be a good cutter and move off the ball, needs lots of shooting, those kinds of things. And I think they nailed it. So you've got Yuta Watanabe, who really has grown as a shooter. He's a great defender on the wing. He was with the Nets last year. They got him for a minimum. You got Drew Eubanks, who definitely should be making more than the minimum. He outplayed Yusuf Nurkic last year on the Blazers, but they got him on the minimum. You've got Keita Bates-Diop, who's playing on the Spurs, so a lot of people didn't see him, but he's got great size. He's a good shooter. He can pass the ball. I think he's got a great shot at kind of being a combo forward who can start for them when they play bigger and have Beal and Booker just at the two guard spots. And then I mentioned Eric Gordon before. I think that he's getting older, but he still has a lot of offer. He's still got a lot of offensive juice, and he's an okay defender. And then they re-signed Damian Lee. They re-signed Josh Okogie. Like, I just think that they built out a roster around their core four that can make it viable. Now, I think they're still thin because there's no one there that you're like, oh, they might pop and be like an above average starter. Like, they don't have that guy. They've got role players. But I think they did well enough to give them a chance at winning. And so I think that they did as well as they could. And probably the reason they did that is because they kind of took advantage of the CBA in that if you offer a 1 year minimum, the league subsidizes that. So most teams that are in the luxury tax are only going to offer 1 year minimums. You look at the Warriors have been doing that for years. The Lakers have been doing that for years to kind of save money. What they did is they offered 1+1s. So they gave 2 year minimum contracts where the player gets a player option on the second year. So they get to control, the player does, to leave after 1 year. But it costs the Suns much more money. Matt Ishbia is paying more money out of his pocket. And I think that was a shrewd move. It just costs them money. It gives the players a little bit more power and incentivizes them, I think, to come to Phoenix. So when you add that to the fact that they get to play alongside Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, I think that was enough to draw in the players they wanted. Most of the times when players just have, teams just have these minimums, they're going after, has-beens, guys that haven't proven in the league. I think the Suns kind of nailed those minimum signings. I think they set themselves up pretty well moving forward. What do you think about how Phoenix did this summer?
Yeah, no, I think they've done fantastically well with the resources they had available. And on to your point there in terms of acquiring those players and the kind of attraction they were able to provide, it also comes down to an opportunity, right? And this is why I've been big on this over the offseason, especially early in free agency, where a lot of Warrior fans were getting frustrated by the team's lack of moves. Well, once the Warriors made the Jordan Poole for Chris Paul trade, they really had a top nine, right? Like the starting five, CP, JK, Moody, Payton. They had a top nine in the rotation that was fairly solidified, which means any free agents that have come in, Saric, Corey Joseph, they're down the list a little bit further and the playing time isn't necessarily there, I should say. If you look at Phoenix, they've got their top four, Beal, Booker, Durant, Ayton, and then there's question marks over everything else. So as a player coming in, you're thinking to yourself, well, if I have a good training camp, if I have a good preseason, then I can automatically come into this and I can get 15, 20 minutes pretty comfortably if I perform well. And so I think that was one of the other big attractions for a lot of these free agents is there's certainly a lot of uncertainty with this roster and kind of the rotation and how the minutes will shake out. So I'm very interested to see who that kind of fifth player is, and I think it'll be in terms of obviously the starting lineup, closing lineups, and where that kind of pans out because Eric Gordon is probably the most well-known, highly credentialed player there, but then he's not he's not going to be a fit next to Beal and Booker unless you're just planning on scoring 150 points per game and letting the other team score 140. Like, that's just ridiculous. So, Keita Bates-Diop is the other one who you mentioned who could certainly fill in that role as more of a defensive-minded player. The other one that I want to have a laugh at because I've seen a lot of posts on social media about Bol Bol, and I've seen graphics, with those four and then Bol and then saying this is the greatest five-man lineup of all time. I just have a really good laugh thinking you cannot have Bol as part of the best five-man unit of all time. That is absolutely ridiculous. So it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. Do you have, is there, going into training camp, do you think there is a player there that you believe will kind of grab hold of that fifth starting spot and, more so as a closer as well?
Yeah, well, I think when you look at the best five-man lineup with Bol, it's kind of like the highest scoring brothers in NHL history is Wayne Gretzky, and then his brother scored 3 goals or something like that, right? So just you get paired with those four guys, and you kind of are up among the best lineups because it definitely has a ton of offensive punch, and so finding that fifth guy is going to be important. So one move we didn't mention was hiring Frank Vogel. I think that was a great hire. I think Monty Williams can do a lot of things for a team to bring them to a certain point. But I think Vogel has proven that he has a bit more of the defensive chops and a bit more of the versatility in the playoffs. And so I think that that's a great addition to this team. And so where I think that matters is that I don't think the Suns are going to lock themselves into one guy. I don't think they're looking to find, okay, here's the 5 guys we want to go to war with. I think they're saying, we've got 4 guys. And then if we're matched up with a team, if they're playing the Warriors and the Warriors are maybe they've got Steph and Chris Paul and Clay, and Wiggins and Draymond, a lineup like that, well then, okay, maybe they put in Josh Okogie and he's gonna take on guarding Steph, or maybe they're playing the Nuggets, and the Nuggets have got, Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr. at the 2 forward spots. Okay, then Keita Bates-Diop is going to be closing because they need more size to guard up on maybe Michael Porter Jr. or something like that. So I think that they have pieces where they can be super versatile. My money is probably on Keita Bates-Diop to get to close most often. I think that's probably what will end up happening. I think they trust Booker's defense fairly well on guards, and there's not a lot of backcourts they're likely to see that would have 2 guys that would really scare them. There's a couple in the league, Cleveland obviously comes to mind, a couple others, but I think they'll probably want the size more often. So I think that Keita Bates-Diop would be my guess to get the most kind of closing minutes, but I think Okogie's got a chance at it. I think Gordon maybe in some of those offensive heavy lineups. And then I think Watanabe's got a chance to play his way there. But I would say Bol is pretty far down that list.
Yeah, I think it's just to grab attention on social media because Bol, he does provide that, that's for sure. Where his actual on-court impact, a little bit less so. The big one here, so we obviously talk about their core four, Ayton. Will he be on this Suns roster by the end of the regular season, in your opinion? Or can you see them moving him for someone else, whether it's a $30 million player or whether it's to grab 2 or 3 pieces at $10, $15 million and really increase that depth?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So if Monty Williams was still the coach, I think Ayton would be gone already. I think the Suns basically said, hey, between these 2 guys, key figures, but they clearly were butting heads, not seeing eye to eye. They decided to move on from Monty Williams and at least attempt to keep Ayton. Now they definitely talked about trading him. I think it's very much on the table. The difficulty with moving Ayton is it's hard to get back equal value when you trade a center. And so, okay, we're going to move Aiton, but what team needs a center and has extra wings? In the modern NBA, that's just not a dynamic that is fairly common. And so it's going to be difficult if they try to move Aiton and get back guys that can help at the same level that Aiton can. So I think ultimately my money's probably on him sticking around. But I will say the Suns have been doing something really interesting in the last couple of weeks. They've been taking advantage of another kind of little rule in the CBA. We've seen pick swaps frequently before, but what the Suns are doing is a double pick swap. So they're saying, okay, if we swap our pick with Washington, then if it's still better than your pick, then you can have that pick and dishing that out to a third team. And what that's allowed them to do is they've been swapping that for seconds. And so now they've actually added a few seconds where they could make some sort of move. My guess is that that's not attaching them to Aiton to go for a big fish. I think it's probably swapping one of these guys they just signed after they're eligible to be traded, and kind of maybe they decide, oh, we actually need this kind of player, or we need to get this kind of skill on the team. So I could see them do something like that. I just think Aiton, the amount of money he makes, it's going to be hard to get a guy that's going to help them as much as he can, because for all of his faults and hasn't quite reached his ceiling, and all that, the Suns would be better off if they'd picked Doncic instead of Aiton at first overall in that draft. I mean, he plays a lot of minutes. He's healthy. He can really score. He can rebound. Like, I think that the he brings enough to the team and that they can't replace that. Ultimately, I think he sticks around. But what do you think?
Yeah, no, I do think with a new coach in place and no longer, like, I covered the Suns a little bit last off season, and to be honest, I'm surprised he's still on the team with how the relationship between he and Monty Williams looked at the start of training camp, where Monty Williams came out and said, or one of the two, I can't remember who it was, came out and said they hadn't spoken to each other for the whole off season, which was just incredible that a coach and a key player who had just re-signed on over $30 million did not speak for the entirety of the off season. Absolutely unbelievable. But I do think, yeah, with Frank Vogel in place, it's kind of a refreshing opportunity here for Aiton to see what he can deliver on both ends of the floor, because offensively I still have question marks on how much opportunity he's actually going to get when you've got Beal and Booker and KD there. And defensively, there's been big question marks over his career so far. So we'll just wait and see how it pans out in a Sun style that should be a lot more defensive minded under Frank Vogel. And just the last thing on the Suns as well, as I said, having covered the team a little bit last offseason, I was really looking forward to how Devin Booker was going to add to his playmaking game, and I think he did take large steps last season in that regard. With Chris Paul obviously not there, like, I think they've named Bradley Beal the starting point guard, but to me, like, Devin Booker is that guy now, and I could see him averaging, I don't know, like 7, 8 assists per game potentially. Like, I think he really took strides in that area last season. I'm looking forward to seeing what he does again with even more responsibility next season.